The gift of the morning. The day started just like any other. Daniel Thompson awoke in the small, dimly lit room he shared with his younger brother, Isaac. Their room was modest, its walls covered in peeling paint with taped-up posters of basketball legends and motivational quotes his mom had encouraged him to hang. Daniel stretched, feeling the tightness in his back from his old, lumpy mattress, but it didn't bother him much. He had long ago grown used to the discomfort and instead focused on the day ahead. He glanced over at his brother, who was still curled up and snoring lightly. A smile touched his lips. Isaac was the youngest in their small family, and his innocence was a constant source of comfort. Daniel was the responsible one, the one who his mother, Lisa, always leaned on. At just 12, Daniel had learned that life in their neighborhood came with challenges, but his mom's unfaltering positivity taught him that they could face it all together. "Rise and shine, sweetheart," Lisa's voice called out from the kitchen, carrying the warmth that only she could bring to their small apartment. The smell of fried eggs and toast drifted into their room, making Daniel's stomach growl with anticipation. Breakfast was rarely more than simple, but with his mom's love, even a plain meal felt like a treat. "Coming, Mom," Daniel replied, making sure not to wake Isaac as he slipped out of bed and reached for his neatly folded school uniform. His mom's voice had the magical ability to lighten the day's load, and he wore his uniform proudly even though the fabric was worn and faded. He knew how hard Lisa worked to keep their clothes clean and presentable, and he wanted to show her that he was grateful. As he entered the kitchen, Lisa turned, her tired eyes brightening when she saw him. Despite the exhaustion Daniel could see in her face from working double shifts at the diner, she greeted him with a kiss on his forehead and a smile. Daniel's mother was his hero. She stood a modest 5'4", with dark, curly hair that she usually pulled into a bun to keep out of her face at work. Her hands, roughened by hours of work, were the gentlest he'd ever known. "Eat up, sweetheart," Lisa said, handing him a plate with 2 fried eggs and a slice of toast. "Big day ahead. Make sure you remember to double-check your backpack for that math book. And don't forget our family motto now." Daniel grinned, though he'd heard it 100 times. "It's not what we have, but who we are that matters," he replied, mimicking his mother's wise tone. She chuckled, patting his shoulder. "That's right, Daniel. Always remember that." Sitting at their small round table, Daniel savored his breakfast. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice sincere. The food was simple, but to him, it felt like a feast. This quiet, shared moment with her was something he cherished deeply. After breakfast, Daniel pulled on his backpack and waved goodbye to his mom. The streets outside were already buzzing with early risers, neighbors on their way to work, the kids playing hopscotch, and the smell of fresh coffee coming from the corner bodega. As he made his way down the sidewalk, Daniel exchanged greetings with people who felt more like family than strangers. He high-fived his best friend, Jamal, and helped Mrs. Harding, their elderly neighbor, carry her groceries to her front porch. Everyone in the neighborhood knew each other, and though they didn't have much, there was a warmth and camaraderie that filled the streets. As Daniel walked towards his school, his mind was already on the math test coming up later that morning. Math wasn't his favorite subject, but he'd studied hard. He hoped to impress his teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, who was always urging him to aim higher. Suddenly, something unusual caught Daniel's eye. Lying on the ground, half hidden under a crisp fallen leaf, was a sleek, black wallet. Daniel froze, glancing around to see if anyone nearby might have dropped it, but there was no one in sight. Curious, he stepped forward and knelt to pick it up. The leather felt smooth and expensive under his fingers, a stark contrast to his well-worn backpack and the faded textbooks inside. As he held the wallet in his hands, his heart raced a little. It was heavier than he'd expected, and when he opened it, Daniel's eyes widened. There, tucked neatly inside, was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. He didn't even have to count them to know it was more money than he had ever seen in his life. His fingers trembled slightly as he gently placed the wallet into his backpack, his mind racing with the possibilities. His first thought was of his mother and all the sacrifices she made. He pictured her face lighting up with relief at the sight of this unexpected fortune. Maybe she could take a day off work, just one day to rest without worrying about bills. Or maybe he could buy something nice for Isaac, who'd been eyeing a new soccer ball for weeks. But as quickly as these thoughts entered Daniel's mind, he shook them away. His mom had always taught him that money earned honestly was worth more than any windfall. "It's not what we have but who we are," he whispered to himself. He knew what he had to do. He would return the wallet. With determination in his step, Daniel set off for downtown, where he knew the office buildings stood. He'd seen pictures of the man whose name was on the driver's license inside the wallet. Thomas Carter, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for his high-rise office downtown. Mr. Carter was known throughout the city as one of the richest men, a man who lived a world apart from Daniel's, and Daniel wasn't even sure if he would be allowed to enter the building where Mr. Carter worked. The walk downtown was long, and Daniel's legs grew tired as he crossed into streets filled with shiny storefronts and well-dressed people hurrying to their jobs. He passed tall, glass-covered buildings that reached towards the sky, their gleaming reflections a stark contrast to the familiar brick facades of his neighborhood. After a while, he found himself standing in front of a tall skyscraper, the very building that housed Mr. Carter's office. The lobby was bustling with people, everyone moving quickly and purposefully. Daniel took a deep breath and approached the large revolving doors. The grandeur of the lobby took his breath away. There were marble floors, a giant chandelier, and even a fountain in the center of the room. For a moment, he felt like he was in a dream, the kind he had only ever read about or seen on TV. He made his way over to the reception desk, where a woman with sleek hair and a crisp blazer looked up from her computer screen. "May I help you?" she asked, her expression a mixture of politeness and surprise. Daniel cleared his throat, feeling his cheeks flush with nervousness. Yes, ma'am. I'm here to see Mr. Thomas Carter. I found something that belongs to him." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, and she gave him a look of surprise before her face softened. "Well, that's very honest of you. Hold on just a moment." She made a quick call, her voice low and professional. After a few moments, she looked up, her smile encouraging. "Mr. Carter will see you. Take the elevator to the 30th floor. His assistant will be waiting for you." Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped into the elevator. As it began its smooth, silent ascent, he watched the floor numbers rise, feeling like he was floating. He glanced down at his worn sneakers and scuffed backpack, feeling out of place in this towering world of glass and steel, but he reminded himself of his mother's words and stood a little taller. When he reached the 30th floor, the doors slid open, revealing a plush hallway lined with artwork and soft carpet that muffled his footsteps. A woman in a sharp navy suit approached him, smiling warmly. "Hello, you must be Daniel," she said. "Mr. Carter is eager to meet you. Follow me." Daniel followed her, his heart racing, as she led him through a maze of hallways. Finally, they reached a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city below. Behind a massive desk sat a man with silver-streaked hair and a commanding presence, Thomas Carter himself. Mr. Carter looked up, his gaze landing on Daniel with a mix of curiosity and surprise. The man's intense eyes softened as he took in the boy standing before him. "Are you the young man who found my wallet?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice deep and steady. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, his voice barely a whisper. With trembling hands, he reached into his backpack and handed the wallet back to Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter examined the wallet, his expression unreadable as he glanced between Daniel and the leather object in his hands. Then he smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Daniel," Mr. Carter said, placing the wallet carefully on his desk. "Not everyone would have done what you did today." Daniel smiled shyly, feeling a sense of pride bubble up inside him. He didn't know it yet, but his decision that morning had set into motion events that would change his life, and the lives of many others, forever. The meeting that changed everything. Daniel sat in the enormous leather chair opposite Mr. Carter's desk, his back straight and his hands gripping the edge of his seat. The office was a world away from anything he knew, plush, polished, and filled with items that seemed like they belonged in a museum rather than in someone's workspace. The tall windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, and for a moment, Daniel felt as if he were suspended above the bustling streets below, somewhere between reality and a dream. Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. For a moment, silence hung in the air, and Daniel shifted slightly under the intense gaze of the wealthy man seated across from him. Then Mr. Carter spoke, his voice carrying a gravity that made Daniel sit up straighter. "You know, Daniel," Mr. Carter began, folding his hands thoughtfully, "when my assistant told me a young man had come all the way downtown to return my wallet, I admit I was intrigued. It's not every day that someone finds a wallet filled with cash and makes the effort to return it." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling a wave of nerves wash over him. He didn't quite know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded, choosing his words carefully. "My mom taught me that honesty is the most important thing," Daniel said softly, his eyes meeting Mr. Carter's. "She always says that money doesn't make you rich. Character does." Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow, visibly impressed. He could see that Daniel wasn't like other kids his age. There was a maturity in him that seemed to defy his 12 years. After a moment's pause, he leaned forward, his gaze intent. "Daniel," he said, his voice softened with admiration, "you've done something remarkable today, and it's clear that your mother has raised you well. I can see the pride in your eyes when you talk about her." At the mention of his mother, Daniel's face lit up with a warm, proud smile. She was the center of his world, his rock, and hearing Mr. Carter praise her felt as if he were acknowledging everything she'd sacrificed to raise him and his little brother. "I'll be honest," Mr. Carter continued, pulling open the drawer in his desk and reaching for something inside. "I'd like to thank you properly for your honesty, Daniel. Not many people would have done what you did today, and I think that deserves recognition." He placed a small envelope on the desk, his hand resting on it as he looked back up at Daniel. "This is a reward, just a small token to show my gratitude for your integrity." Daniel's eyes fell on the envelope, and though he didn't know what it contained, he felt a lump form in his throat. The idea of accepting money, especially for doing something he felt was just the right thing to do, made him feel uneasy. His mom had always taught him that doing good should come from the heart, not from the hope of a reward. "Thank you, sir," Daniel said, his voice firm but respectful. "But I can't accept it. I didn't bring the wallet back because I wanted something in return. I just did what I thought was right." Mr. Carter's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he was speechless. He studied the boy before him, feeling a pang of something unfamiliar, a mixture of admiration and a deep respect that stirred him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He withdrew his hand from the envelope, a thoughtful expression settling on his face. "Are you sure, Daniel?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. "This could help you and your family. It's quite a bit of money." Daniel's heart raced at the thought of taking the money and how it could ease the burdens his mom carried, but his resolve held firm. He shook his head, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "Yes, sir," he replied, meeting Mr. Carter's gaze steadily. "My mom taught me that honesty isn't something you trade. It's just who you are." Mr. Carter let out a low chuckle, a rare smile breaking through his usually stoic expression. He leaned back, watching Daniel with a new respect. "I understand," he said quietly. "You're a rare young man, Daniel, and I have a feeling you'll go far. But if you ever need help, you come to me. My door is always open." Daniel nodded, a mixture of pride and relief washing over him. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said sincerely, feeling that the man's words were the only reward he needed. They shook hands, and with a final respectful nod, Daniel stood and made his way out of the office. As he walked down the hallway, his steps felt lighter, as if he were floating. He had done the right thing, and the sense of pride he felt was like nothing he'd ever experienced before. Back in his office, Mr. Carter sat in silence, his mind occupied with thoughts of the young boy who had just left. He tapped his fingers on the desk, deep in thought. Daniel's integrity had stirred something in him, something he couldn't quite explain. This boy had reminded him of a part of himself he had nearly forgotten. Growing up, Mr. Carter had also come from a humble background, and he had once believed in the power of honesty and hard work. Somewhere along the way, he had grown detached from those values, focused more on building his empire than nurturing the kindness he had once treasured. Daniel's act of honesty had rekindled something within him, and he felt a strong urge to give back to the community in a meaningful way. A thought began to form in his mind, a thought that would lead to a decision that would change lives. Without another moment's hesitation, he reached for the phone and dialed his assistant. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm, "I'd like you to arrange a visit to Daniel's school. Call the principal and explain that I'd like to speak with her in person about something important." At school the next day, Daniel tried to focus on his studies, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened in Mr. Carter's office. He didn't regret his decision to refuse the money, but part of him wondered if he'd done the right thing by returning the wallet. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the math problems his teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, had assigned. Around midday, a soft knock on the classroom door interrupted the lesson, and the principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, stepped into the room. She was an older woman with a kind but firm demeanor, known for her dedication to the students and her unwavering standards. She looked directly at Daniel, a hint of a smile on her face. "Daniel," she said, "could you come with me for a moment?" Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. He rose slowly, his palms beginning to sweat. His classmates whispered and exchanged glances, some casting him looks of curiosity and even suspicion. Daniel followed Mrs. Rodriguez out of the classroom, his mind racing. What could this be about? As they walked down the hallway, Mrs. Rodriguez placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Don't worry, Daniel," she said softly, sensing his apprehension. "You're not in any trouble. In fact, I think you're about to receive some wonderful news." They approached the main office, where a familiar figure stood waiting. Mr. Carter. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he seemed out of place in the modest surroundings of the school, yet his expression was warm and sincere as he spotted Daniel. Standing next to him was a police officer, Officer Martinez, who served as the school's community liaison. The sight of the officer made Daniel's stomach clench with worry. "Mr. Carter," Mrs. Rodriguez said, gesturing to Daniel. "Here's the young man you wanted to meet." Mr. Carter nodded, his gaze focused intently on Daniel. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. And thank you, Officer Martinez, for your assistance." Daniel stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes shifting between Mr. Carter and Officer Martinez. Am I in trouble?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter shook his head, a reassuring smile on his face. "Not at all, Daniel. I wanted to visit because your act of honesty deserves recognition." Officer Martinez stepped forward, his expression kind. "Daniel, I've worked in this community for many years, and it's not every day that I see young people with your level of integrity. What you did yesterday speaks volumes, and we want to make sure others know that doing the right thing matters." Daniel's cheeks flushed, and he felt a mixture of pride and embarrassment. He looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "I didn't do it to get noticed," he murmured. "I just thought it was the right thing to do." Mr. Carter placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, his expression serious yet warm. "That's exactly why it deserves to be recognized, Daniel. Honesty is a rare thing, and I believe it should be celebrated." The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, smiled and placed her arm around Daniel. "We're going to hold a special assembly this afternoon," she announced. "Mr. Carter has something he'd like to share with the entire school." Daniel's eyes widened in surprise, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The idea of standing in front of the entire school was daunting, but the thought of spreading his mom's message about integrity filled him with pride. That afternoon, the students filed into the gymnasium, curious whispers filling the air as they took their seats. Daniel sat near the front, his stomach in knots, as Mr. Carter took the stage, with Officer Martinez by his side. He addressed the crowd, recounting the story of how Daniel had found and returned his wallet. "Daniel's honesty is something we should all aspire to," Mr. Carter said, his voice carrying across the gymnasium. In a world where people often look for what they can gain, Daniel chose to do what was right. That, my friends, is a rare and valuable thing. The students applauded, and Daniel's classmates looked at him with admiration, some even giving him a thumbs up. Daniel's face flushed with pride, his heart swelling as he felt the impact of his small act. But Mr. Carter wasn't finished. "In honor of Daniel's integrity, I am proud to announce the Daniel Thompson Scholarship Fund. This scholarship will support students in this school who demonstrate the same commitment to honesty and community that Daniel has shown." The crowd erupted in applause, and Daniel felt a sense of awe and gratitude wash over him. The scholarship fund would help students who, like him, wanted to succeed but faced challenges. His simple decision to return a wallet had set in motion a chain of events that would affect not just him, but countless others in his community. As the assembly ended, students crowded around him, congratulating him and asking questions. Daniel looked around, his heart full, knowing that his life had changed in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. When he returned home that evening, his mother was waiting with open arms, her face full of pride and love. She hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes as she listened to him recount the day's events. And as Daniel went to bed that night, he felt an unfamiliar but comforting feeling settle over him, a sense of purpose, a quiet understanding that his life was just beginning. A new chapter begins. The day after the assembly felt like a whirlwind. As Daniel made his way to school, he noticed how people greeted him differently. Some neighbors gave him nods of respect, and his friends waved with more enthusiasm. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but he carried it lightly, his mother's advice echoing in his mind. "Stay humble, no matter what comes your way." In class, Daniel found himself the center of whispers and stares, his classmates glancing at him with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Mrs. Reynolds, his math teacher, was uncharacteristically kind, even cracking a smile when she handed him his latest test. He had gotten a B+, his highest score yet, and she gave him an approving nod as he took his seat. That simple acknowledgement felt as monumental as any of the applause he'd received the day before. At lunch, Daniel's usual table was fuller than ever. Jamal, his best friend, sat beside him as usual, but other classmates had joined them, eager to hear more about his encounter with Mr. Carter. "So, Daniel, what was it like being in that big office?" one boy, Chris, asked, his eyes wide with interest. "Did Mr. Carter really offer you money?" Daniel hesitated, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the question. "Yeah," he admitted, looking down at his sandwich. "But it just didn't feel right to take it. My mom taught me to do what's right, not just what's easy." Jamal gave him a playful nudge. "Man, that's why you're the best of us," he said with a grin. Not everyone would have done that. The group murmured in agreement, and for the first time, Daniel felt a surge of pride that wasn't laced with doubt. Maybe his choice had made a difference. He didn't want to bask in the attention, but knowing that he had set an example for his friends made him feel good. Perhaps this scholarship could be a force for positive change, not just for him, but for anyone who chose to follow the path of integrity. Later that week, Principal Rodriguez pulled Daniel aside, her face brimming with excitement. "Daniel," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "we're planning a ceremony to formally launch the scholarship fund Mr. Carter established. It will be held in the auditorium, and the entire school will be there." Mr. Carter asked if you'd be willing to say a few words. Would you be up for it? Daniel's stomach flipped. Speaking in front of the whole school again. The thought made his palms sweat, but he took a deep breath, thinking about his mother's words. Sometimes doing what's right means stepping out of your comfort zone. He looked up at Principal Rodriguez and nodded. I'll do it, he said, though his voice trembled slightly. The day of the ceremony arrived sooner than Daniel expected. The gymnasium was packed, filled not only with students and teachers but with members of the community. Some local news stations had even come, their cameras stationed at the back of the room. Daniel's hands felt clammy as he sat beside Mr. Carter, who was dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to command attention effortlessly. Mr. Carter noticed Daniel's nerves and leaned over, his voice warm and reassuring. You've got this, Daniel, he said with a small smile. Just speak from your heart. People need to hear your story. As the principal introduced the scholarship fund and explained its purpose, Daniel's mind raced. He thought back to the moment he found the wallet, the brief temptation to keep the money, and the pride he'd felt when he returned it. He remembered his mother's face when he told her about the scholarship, how her eyes had filled with tears of pride. And now, Principal Rodriguez said, bringing him back to the present, I'd like to welcome the young man whose honesty inspired all of this, Daniel Thompson. The audience erupted in applause as Daniel stood, his legs shaky but his resolve firm. He made his way to the podium, gripping it tightly as he looked out over the crowd. Taking a deep breath, he began. Hi, everyone, he said, his voice echoing through the gym. I never thought I'd be standing here today, especially not because of something as small as returning a wallet. He paused, glancing at Mr. Carter, who gave him an encouraging nod. When I found Mr. Carter's wallet, I thought about keeping it, just for a second. But then I remembered what my mom always taught me, that honesty is something you carry with you, no matter what. He felt a wave of calm wash over him as he continued, the words coming more naturally. I didn't return the wallet for a reward. I returned it because it was the right thing to do. And now, thanks to Mr. Carter and this scholarship, I have the chance to work toward a brighter future. And so do others who believe in doing what's right. Daniel's gaze swept over his classmates, some of whom were watching with wide eyes. We all have the power to make a difference. Sometimes it just starts with a small choice to do what's right. The applause was thunderous, and as Daniel returned to his seat, he felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. He glanced at Mr. Carter, who smiled with pride, and then at his mom, who was seated in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. As the ceremony concluded, people gathered around Daniel, offering their congratulations and words of encouragement. But it wasn't the compliments that stuck with him. It was the sense of connection he felt with his community, a sense that they were all rooting for him, that they believed in him. In the weeks following the ceremony, Daniel's life began to shift in unexpected ways. His teachers noticed a new spark of confidence in him, and he found himself working harder in his classes, determined to make the most of the opportunities the scholarship might bring. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream of college, of a future beyond the streets of his neighborhood. Word of the scholarship spread quickly, and soon, other students were talking about ways they could make a difference. Mrs. Reynolds, his math teacher, started a student integrity club, where students could discuss ways to contribute to their community. Daniel was chosen as the club's first president, a role that felt both humbling and empowering. Each week, the club held meetings to discuss ways they could make a positive impact. They organized neighborhood cleanups, helped collect books for the library, and even set up a tutoring program for younger kids. Daniel found himself inspired by the enthusiasm of his classmates, who threw themselves into the projects with a genuine desire to make a difference. Through all of this, Mr. Carter remained involved, visiting the school regularly to check on the club's progress. He seemed to take a special interest in Daniel, often staying after meetings to chat with him, offering advice on everything from leadership to schoolwork. Their conversations were warm and insightful, and over time, Daniel came to see Mr. Carter as more than a benefactor. He saw him as a mentor, someone who genuinely cared about his future. One day, after a particularly successful meeting, Mr. Carter approached Daniel with an idea. "How would you feel about starting a mentorship program here at the school?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "I think you'd be an excellent mentor for some of the younger kids." Daniel's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "I'd love that," he said, his heart racing with excitement. The thought of guiding younger kids, of helping them find their own paths, filled him with a sense of purpose. He knew that without people like his mom and Mr. Carter, he wouldn't be where he was today, and the idea of paying it forward resonated deeply with him. Over the next few months, the mentorship program blossomed. Students from all grades signed up, eager to be part of something that felt meaningful. Daniel found himself working closely with the younger students, listening to their struggles, encouraging their dreams, and sharing the lessons he had learned from his mother and Mr. Carter. He quickly became a role model in the eyes of the younger students. Kids would run up to him in the hallways, excitedly sharing their achievements or asking for advice. He learned to balance his responsibilities as a mentor with his studies, feeling a new sense of pride in his ability to lead. The program's impact rippled through the community, reaching even beyond the walls of the school. Parents expressed their gratitude, and local leaders took notice, offering resources to help expand the club's reach. The school began hosting community events, drawing people from all over the neighborhood who wanted to support the students' efforts. One afternoon, as Daniel was helping a fourth grader with his math homework, he looked around the busy classroom. The once quiet space was now alive with laughter, learning, and a shared sense of purpose. The community center they dreamed of was coming to life within the school walls, a place where kids felt safe and encouraged to reach their potential. As the months passed, Daniel's vision continued to grow. With Mr. Carter's guidance, he began setting goals for his own future, dreaming of studying business or law. He wanted to use his education to give back, to be the kind of leader who could help uplift his community. One evening, Mr. Carter invited Daniel to his office. As they sat in the familiar space, Mr. Carter leaned forward, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Daniel, I've been watching you grow over the past year, and I couldn't be prouder of how far you've come. You've shown resilience, integrity, and leadership that most people don't develop until much later in life." Daniel looked down, feeling the surge of pride mixed with humility. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he replied quietly. "I just want to do the right thing." Mr. Carter nodded, his eyes gleaming with respect. "That's why I believe you're destined for great things. And to help you on your journey, I want to offer you something." He pulled a small envelope from his desk and slid it across the table. Daniel looked at it, his brow furrowing in confusion. "It's not money," Mr. Carter said with a smile. "It's an invitation to intern at my company this summer. I want you to get a taste of the business world, to learn the ropes and see if it's something you might want to pursue." Daniel's eyes widened with excitement. "Really?" he asked, barely able to contain his joy. "Really," Mr. Carter replied, chuckling. "I see potential in you, Daniel, and I'd like to help you develop it." As Daniel took the envelope, he felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. His journey had started with a small act of honesty, a choice to return a wallet. But it had grown into something so much bigger, something that was transforming his life and the lives of those around him. Leaving Mr. Carter's office that day, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The scholarship fund, the mentorship program, his newfound role as a community leader, all of it was just the beginning. He was ready for whatever lay ahead, knowing that with integrity and determination, he could create a future brighter than he had ever imagined. Lessons in leadership. Summer arrived in a rush of warm days and long evenings, bringing with it the promise of new experiences for Daniel. As the final bell rang on the last day of school, he felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This summer, he wouldn't just be hanging out with friends or helping his mom at home. He was about to step into the unfamiliar world of business through an internship with Mr. Carter's company. The first morning of his internship, Daniel woke up before dawn, his stomach filled with butterflies. His mother had stayed up late the night before, pressing his clothes and making sure he had everything he needed. As he pulled on the crisp white shirt and the dark blue tie she'd picked out for him, he felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Lisa's eyes shone with pride as she handed him his lunch, her voice brimming with encouragement. "Remember, Daniel," she said, hugging him tightly, "just be yourself. You're going to do great things. I know it." Her words stayed with him as he rode the bus downtown, watching the city pass by through the window. When he reached the towering office building, he took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and walked in, feeling small yet determined as he passed through the massive glass doors. Inside, the lobby was bustling with people hurrying to elevators, their heels clicking on the polished floor. He was greeted warmly by Sarah, Mr. Carter's assistant, who guided him to his workspace and introduced him to the team he'd be working with. Sarah was friendly, yet professional, and Daniel found her presence reassuring. "Welcome, Daniel," she said, smiling. "We're all excited to have you here. You'll be shadowing me and helping with some projects Mr. Carter thought you'd find interesting." Over the next few weeks, Daniel adjusted to the new routines of office life. He learned quickly, absorbing as much as he could about how the business world operated. Every day was a whirlwind of new information: spreadsheets, meetings, presentations, and calls. He took diligent notes, staying late to review them, and often staying after hours to complete extra tasks, always eager to make a good impression. One of his main responsibilities was assisting Sarah with managing the new Community Scholarship Fund. The scholarship program had expanded beyond the initial funding Mr. Carter had set up in Daniel's honor. It now aimed to support students from all over the city who demonstrated the same honesty, kindness, and sense of community that Daniel had shown. As Daniel worked on organizing applications, reading through the stories of other students, he felt humbled and inspired. There were kids from all different backgrounds, each with dreams of making a difference. He often found himself jotting down notes on how they could improve the fund or make it more accessible to students in need. One morning, as he was organizing files, Mr. Carter called him into his office. Daniel walked in, feeling both excited and a little intimidated. Mr. Carter was seated behind his massive desk, his eyes warm with approval as he looked up from his paperwork. "Daniel, you've been doing a fantastic job," Mr. Carter began, gesturing for him to sit down. "Sarah tells me you're organized, committed, and always looking for ways to improve things. That's exactly the kind of energy I like to see." Daniel's face broke into a grin, but he quickly composed himself, sitting up straighter. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm just trying to do my best." Mr. Carter leaned forward, his gaze thoughtful. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you, Daniel. We've been planning a special project, something that would directly benefit the community you come from. It's a youth entrepreneurship program. We'd help local teens learn the basics of starting a small business, budgeting, and leadership, and I'd like you to help us with it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Me? But I don't know much about business yet. I'm still learning." Mr. Carter smiled, nodding in understanding. "That's exactly why I think you're perfect for this, Daniel. You know firsthand the challenges people in your neighborhood face, and you're already a natural leader. You have the respect and trust of your community. This program would be more than just business lessons. It's about giving young people the chance to dream bigger and to understand what they're capable of achieving." Daniel's heart pounded with excitement and a touch of doubt. The thought of leading a program like that was both thrilling and daunting. But as he thought back to everything his mom had taught him and the journey he'd been on so far, he felt a wave of determination. "I'd love to help," he said, his voice steady. "I think it could make a real difference." Mr. Carter beamed, clearly pleased. "That's the spirit, Daniel. Now, let's get to work." Over the following weeks, Daniel threw himself into planning the youth entrepreneurship program. He researched, made calls to local businesses, and even visited community leaders to discuss the project. He worked closely with Mr. Carter, learning how to organize events, create budgets, and manage resources. He also spent a lot of time in his own neighborhood, talking to teens and gauging their interest. He was surprised by how many of his peers wanted to participate, kids who were passionate about everything from designing clothes to opening food stalls to teaching art classes. His friend Jamal was one of the first to sign up, eager to learn the ropes of managing a business. The program officially launched at the start of August. The community center was buzzing with activity as local teens filled the hall for the first workshop. Daniel took a deep breath as he stood at the front of the room, looking out at a sea of familiar faces, some smiling, some curious, and some skeptical. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm not an expert," he began, glancing at Jamal, who gave him an encouraging nod, "but I believe in what we can do together. This program is about more than just making money. It's about creating opportunities for ourselves, for our families, and for our community. I hope we can all learn something here, something that will help us go further than we thought we could." As the weeks went by, the program gained momentum. Daniel led workshops on basic budgeting, goal setting, and even marketing. Local business owners volunteered to give talks, sharing their experiences and tips for overcoming challenges. Mr. Carter attended many of the sessions, sometimes bringing along his business partners who were eager to support the cause. For Daniel, each workshop was a lesson not only in business, but in empathy and leadership. He learned to listen to his peers, to understand their struggles, and to help them see the potential in themselves. Watching his friends and classmates tackle their business ideas with passion and dedication inspired him to work harder, to push past his own doubts. Jamal, who had always been a jokester and a bit of a troublemaker, surprised everyone with his dedication. He threw himself into the program, working tirelessly on his idea to start a neighborhood lawn care business. Daniel watched as Jamal transformed, his confidence growing with each passing week. One day, as they worked on their business plans together, Jamal looked up at him, his eyes serious. "You know, Daniel," he said quietly, "if you hadn't done what you did with Mr. Carter's wallet, none of this would be happening. I probably would still be getting in trouble and going nowhere fast. Thanks, man." Daniel felt a lump in his throat, but he simply nodded, patting Jamal on the back. "We're in this together, Jamal. We're just getting started." As the summer ended, the Youth Entrepreneurship Program culminated in a community showcase. Each participant presented their business plans, complete with posters, prototypes, and demonstrations. Parents, neighbors, and even city officials filled the community center, eager to see what the young people had accomplished. Daniel felt a sense of pride as he walked around, watching his friends present their ideas with confidence and enthusiasm. Jamal's lawn care business had gained so much interest that he already had a handful of clients lined up. Other students had plans to open small food stands, tutoring services, and even a mobile thrift shop. Mr. Carter took the stage at the end of the showcase, his voice warm as he addressed the crowd. "Tonight, we've seen the incredible potential that lies within each of these young people. I am proud, beyond words, of what they have achieved. This isn't just about business. It's about creating opportunities, about showing our youth that they have the power to shape their own futures." He gestured to Daniel, inviting him up to the stage. The audience applauded, and Daniel felt his cheeks flush as he stood beside Mr. Carter. "I want to thank Daniel especially," Mr. Carter continued, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It was his honesty, his courage, and his willingness to lead that made this program possible. Daniel is a shining example of what can happen when we do what's right." The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, and Daniel's heart swelled with gratitude. His mother stood in the front row, her face beaming with pride as she wiped away tears. And beside her stood Sarah, his teachers and friends who had supported him on his journey. As the applause died down, Daniel stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. "This program means everything to me," he said, glancing out at his friends and family. "I just hope we can keep building, keep growing, and keep helping each other. I wouldn't be here without my mom, Mr. Carter, and all of you. And I want everyone here to know that no matter where you start, you can always make a difference." The night ended with hugs, laughter, and promises of continued support. As Daniel walked home with his mom, he felt a sense of peace and fulfillment he'd never known before. The summer had transformed him, shaping him into a leader and instilling a purpose that went beyond his own dreams. Back at their apartment, as he sat with his mother, Lisa looked at him with teary eyes. "You've done something amazing, Daniel," she said softly. "You've made me so proud." Daniel hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her love and the weight of her pride. "I'm just doing what you taught me, Mom," he whispered. "This is just the beginning." And as he lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, he felt a sense of anticipation for the future. His story had started with a single act of honesty, but it had grown into something he could hardly have imagined. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but he felt ready to lead, to grow, and to continue making a difference, one step at a time, rising through the storm. The weeks following the community showcase felt like a dream for Daniel. His classmates, teachers, and even people he barely knew treated him with a respect that he was only beginning to understand. The youth entrepreneurship program he had helped launch was thriving. Jamal's lawn care business was already making profits, and other students were finding small but meaningful ways to build their ventures. The spark Daniel had ignited was growing into a movement, and it felt like nothing could stand in their way. But life, as Daniel had come to understand, rarely stayed smooth for long. One bright autumn afternoon, as Daniel was heading home from school, he noticed 2 police cars parked outside his apartment building. His heart raced, and his mind immediately jumped to his mother and brother. Dropping his backpack, he sprinted up the stairs to their apartment, breathless and anxious. When he arrived, he found his mother standing in the doorway, speaking with Officer Martinez, the school liaison officer who had helped with the scholarship assembly. "Mom," Daniel called out, his voice shaky. Lisa turned to him, her face strained but calm. She pulled him into a tight hug, whispering, "It's okay, Daniel. There was a break-in in the building. The police are just making sure everyone's safe." Daniel exhaled, his relief palpable. But Officer Martinez looked troubled as he glanced at Daniel. "Daniel," he began slowly, "we also need to talk to you about something that happened at school." Confused, Daniel looked up at him. "At school? Did I do something wrong?" Officer Martinez shook his head but looked uncomfortable. "Not exactly, Daniel. It seems some people in the community are questioning how the scholarship fund is being handled. There's been a rumor going around that you've been receiving special treatment. And well, some people have started to say that maybe the money is being misused." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Misused. The very idea made him feel sick. Everything he had done with complete transparency and honesty. He'd spent hours managing the scholarship applications, working with Sarah and Mr. Carter to ensure fairness. This isn't true," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "I've been working hard to make sure everything is fair." Lisa squeezed his shoulder, her eyes flashing with a protective anger. "Daniel has only ever done what's right. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't know him at all." Officer Martinez nodded sympathetically. "I believe you, Daniel. But sometimes, when people see others succeeding, they start to feel resentful. Unfortunately, the rumors have started to spread, and some parents have even requested to see the scholarship's records." Daniel felt a wave of shame and frustration. He had tried so hard to set an example, to create something meaningful, and now people were questioning his intentions. But he took a deep breath, meeting Officer Martinez's gaze. "I'll do whatever I need to prove that everything is above board," he said, his voice steady. "If they want to see the records, let them. I have nothing to hide." The next morning, Daniel walked into school feeling a tension he hadn't known before. He could sense the whispers and glances from classmates and even some teachers. Some of his friends approached him with encouraging words, while others seemed uncertain. as if they didn't know whether to trust him. When he reached his locker, Jamal was there waiting, his arms crossed and a look of concern on his face. "Man, people are talking, Daniel," he said quietly, his eyes serious. "They're saying you've been taking money for yourself, that Mr. Carter's just trying to buy his reputation by using you." Daniel clenched his fists, feeling a spark of anger. "That's not true, Jamal. You know that. I've done everything I could to help everyone. This scholarship is for all of us, not just me." Jamal nodded, his face softening. "I know, bro. I know. But not everyone sees it that way. They just see the success and think you got it easy." The day felt like an eternity. Daniel did his best to focus in class, but the constant stares and whispers gnawed at him, eroding the confidence he'd built over the summer. He kept replaying conversations in his head, wondering if he'd somehow done something to cause this. After school, Principal Rodriguez called him into her office. She sat him down, her expression one of calm but serious concern. "Daniel, I want you to know that I believe in you," she began. "But the school board has received complaints, and as a result, we're required to conduct an audit of the scholarship fund. This will mean reviewing your involvement as well as Mr. Carter's contributions." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling a pang of dread. "I understand, Ms. Rodriguez. I'll cooperate fully. I just wanted to help." Principal Rodriguez placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You have helped, Daniel. But sometimes, doing the right thing means facing challenges that test our resolve. This won't be easy, but I have no doubt that the truth will come out." That evening, Daniel met with Mr. Carter at his office. They sat across from each other, and for the first time, Daniel could see a trace of worry in the usually confident businessman's face. "Daniel," Mr. Carter began, his voice gentle, "I'm sorry this is happening. Unfortunately, success often brings scrutiny, and people can be quick to judge, especially when money is involved." Daniel looked down, his fingers clenching the edge of the chair. "I just don't understand why people would think I would do something wrong. I thought they trusted me." Mr. Carter leaned forward, his eyes filled with empathy. "This isn't about you, Daniel. It's about people's fears, their insecurities. You've done everything right. Now it's our turn to face this challenge together." Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Mr. Carter worked closely with the school's auditors, providing detailed records of every transaction, every scholarship decision, and every activity related to the fund. Daniel attended meetings, learning to handle the scrutiny with resilience, even as some of his classmates continued to question his intentions. His mother's support remained steadfast, her faith in him unshakable. During this time, Daniel felt the true weight of leadership. He had thought his hardest challenges were behind him, but now he faced the reality that success could sometimes bring misunderstanding and doubt. Late at night, he would lay awake, his mind racing with questions and uncertainties. He wondered if he'd ever regain the trust of his community, or if the scholarship would survive this scrutiny. One afternoon, after another grueling review session with the school board, Daniel walked to the community center. It was quiet, the usual after-school buzz absent as kids had started avoiding the place, hesitant to be associated with the scholarship. Daniel sighed, feeling the weight of loneliness settle over him. But as he walked through the halls, he heard the faint sound of laughter coming from the library. Curious, he approached and peeked inside. There, sitting around a table, were some of the younger kids from the mentorship program, huddled together over their homework. They looked up as he entered, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "Daniel," one of the younger boys called out, waving him over. "Can you help us with this math problem? It's so hard." Daniel smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Despite everything, these kids still looked up to him. They didn't care about the rumors or the accusations. They only cared about the guidance and support he had given them. He spent the next hour working with them, feeling a sense of peace return as they laughed and learned together. It reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about making a difference, even in small ways. At the end of the month, the school board released the results of their audit. In a public announcement, they confirmed that every penny of the scholarship fund had been used appropriately and that there was no evidence of misconduct. They commended Daniel for his transparency and integrity, publicly acknowledging his efforts to create a better future for his community. The relief Daniel felt was overwhelming. The accusations, the scrutiny, the whispers, they all fell away, replaced by a sense of triumph. The community rallied around him once more, their faith in him restored. His friends congratulated him, and Jamal, in particular, stood by his side, defending him to anyone who had doubted him. At the next meeting of the Student Integrity Club, Daniel addressed the group, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I won't lie," he said, his gaze meeting each of theirs. "The past few weeks have been hard. But I've learned something important. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, and sometimes it feels like no one understands. But that doesn't mean you stop. You keep going, because you believe in what you're doing." His words resonated with the room, and he could see the determination in their eyes. They understood that his journey hadn't been smooth, but they admired his courage and resilience. In the following weeks, the community center was busier than ever. The youth entrepreneurship program grew, and Daniel continued his work with Mr. Carter, developing new projects to support young people in the area. And though the challenges he had faced had left a mark, they had also deepened his resolve. One evening, as he walked home with his mother, he looked up at her, his voice quiet but sure. "Mom, I think I know now what you meant when you said that character matters more than anything we have," he said, his eyes reflecting a newfound maturity. Lisa smiled, wrapping her arm around him. "You've always had that character, Daniel. Sometimes life just has to remind us of what we're truly capable of." Daniel nodded, his heart filled with gratitude and purpose. He knew the road ahead would be filled with more challenges, but he also knew he was ready. He had built something real, something lasting, and he would continue to build, one honest step at a time. As they walked together under the streetlights, Daniel felt the strength of his community around him, the love of his family, and the quiet assurance that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The legacy of integrity. Months had passed since the storm of scrutiny had tested Daniel's resolve, and in that time, the community's trust in him had only strengthened. The scholarship fund continued to grow, with new donors inspired by Daniel's story, and the youth entrepreneurship program had become a fixture in the neighborhood. Daniel could feel that he and his peers were creating something truly lasting, something that might continue even after he graduated. But along with these achievements came the quiet, persistent feeling that his journey had only just begun. One Saturday morning, Mr. Carter invited Daniel and his mother to a special breakfast at his house, a sprawling estate with lush gardens and a view that overlooked the city. It was the first time Daniel had visited Mr. Carter's home, and as he looked around in awe, he couldn't help but marvel at the contrast between Mr. Carter's world and his own. Yet, in the past year, he had learned to see beyond appearances. Mr. Carter had been a pillar of support and a true friend, despite their different lives. As they gathered around the dining table, enjoying a spread of fresh fruit, eggs, and homemade pastries, Mr. Carter shared stories from his early days as a struggling entrepreneur. "There were plenty of times when I almost gave up," he said, laughing. "Starting from scratch wasn't easy, but I learned that resilience is just as important as hard work. Without it, you can't achieve anything lasting." Daniel nodded, listening intently. He had come to understand that setbacks were part of the journey. Just a few months ago, he'd felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Now he saw those difficult times as stepping stones that had strengthened his resolve. At one point during breakfast, Mr. Carter looked at Daniel with a serious expression. "I want you to know, Daniel, that this scholarship fund isn't just about you or me. It's about everyone who believes in the power of doing what's right. And it's my hope that one day you'll take over the program and lead it forward." Daniel's eyes widened, surprised by the weight of Mr. Carter's words. "Me, take over the scholarship fund?" Mr. Carter nodded, smiling. "Yes, you have the heart, the integrity, and the courage to lead. I've seen you grow from a young boy into a true leader, and I have no doubt that you could guide this program with the same values you've shown since the beginning." Daniel looked over at his mother, who nodded encouragingly, her pride evident. The idea of carrying on Mr. Carter's legacy and expanding the scholarship program filled him with both excitement and humility. He had always known that he wanted to help his community, but this was a responsibility he hadn't anticipated. "I'd be honored," Daniel said, his voice steady with newfound determination. "I won't let you down." As summer turned to fall, Daniel continued his work with the Youth Entrepreneurship Program, diving deeper into community projects and spending more time mentoring younger students. His story had become a source of inspiration, and local media occasionally featured him, highlighting the impact of his work. With each passing day, he felt a stronger sense of purpose, aware that he was part of something bigger than himself. One evening, while Daniel was helping clean up after a community event, Mrs. Johnson, one of the elderly residents in the neighborhood, approached him. She had watched him grow up, often giving him candy or calling him over to help with groceries when he was younger. "Daniel," she said, her voice warm with affection, "I'm so proud of you. You remind me of my own son. He wanted to make a difference too, but life wasn't always fair to him. Seeing you out here, leading the way and doing good, it gives me hope that there's still kindness in the world." Her words struck a chord with Daniel. He had always believed that kindness could change lives, but hearing it from someone who had seen the hardships of life firsthand made him feel the weight of his responsibility. He was no longer just a boy trying to do the right thing. He had become a symbol of hope for his community, a reminder that one small act could spark a movement. That night, as he sat with his mother, Daniel shared Mrs. Johnson's words. Lissa listened, her eyes brimming with tears, and took his hand. "You've always been my pride, Daniel," she said softly. "But what you're doing now, it's bigger than both of us. You're giving people a reason to believe in the good in others, and that's a legacy not many people get to create." As Daniel entered his final year of high school, he began applying to colleges with dreams of studying social work and community development. His experiences with Mr. Carter's company and the community center had shaped his vision for the future, and he knew he wanted to dedicate his life to helping others. One chilly autumn morning, Daniel received his acceptance letter to a prestigious university. The scholarship Mr. Carter had established would cover his tuition, and he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude as he realized that his journey was about to take him even further than he had imagined. At the farewell assembly held at his high school, Daniel was asked to speak one last time. The auditorium was packed, filled with students, teachers, parents, and community members who had supported him throughout his journey. Standing at the podium, Daniel looked out over the audience, his heart filled with gratitude. "When I found Mr. Carter's wallet that day, I never imagined it would lead me here," he began, his voice steady. "But it taught me something important. Doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it's hard, even when people doubt you. Integrity isn't just a word, it's a choice we make every day." He paused, looking around at the familiar faces. "This community has given me everything. My mother, my friends, my teachers. You've all shown me that we're stronger together. And I want you all to know that no matter where life takes me, I will always carry this place with me." As he finished, the crowd rose to their feet, their applause filling the room. Jamal, his best friend who had become a successful young entrepreneur with his lawn care business, cheered the loudest, beaming with pride. Principal Rodriguez wiped a tear from her eye, and Mr. Carter, seated in the front row, gave him a standing ovation, a look of profound respect on his face. After the assembly, Daniel spent the day saying goodbye to friends and mentors, feeling a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. Mr. Carter pulled him aside before he left, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've grown into an incredible young man, Daniel," he said. "The world needs people like you. Don't ever lose sight of who you are." "I won't, Mr. Carter," Daniel replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything. I'll make sure the scholarship program continues to grow." As he walked home with his mother that evening, Daniel felt a sense of peace. He knew that his journey was only beginning, but he also knew that he was prepared for whatever came next. His mother held his hand as they walked, her pride evident in every step. And as they passed by the community center that bore his name, Daniel looked back, feeling the weight of his legacy. He wasn't just a boy from the neighborhood anymore. He was a leader, a symbol of hope, and a testament to the power of integrity. In the years that followed, Daniel's influence continued to ripple outward. The Daniel Thompson Scholarship Fund grew, helping countless students achieve their dreams, and the Youth Entrepreneurship Program became a model for other communities. Daniel returned often to his hometown, mentoring the next generation of young leaders and reminding them that greatness wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by the strength of one's character. Through every triumph and setback, Daniel remained true to the values his mother had instilled in him. And as he looked out over the lives he had touched, he understood that his journey had come full circle. The choice he had made that day on the sidewalk, the decision to return a wallet, had created a legacy that would live on for generations. And in the quiet moments, Daniel could still hear his mother's voice, reminding him of their family motto. "It's not what we have, but who we are, that matters." In the end, Daniel knew that he had done something extraordinary, not because he sought fame or fortune, but because he had simply done what was right. And that, he realized, was the most powerful legacy of all.